So it's lovely to see a lot of old friends and a lot of people who have not been to one of these meetings before. It's great to see so many people. This is clearly a very, very special day for me. It is one of my most important days in terms of our research and bringing people together. It's very, very special. But it's really important to know that this is your meeting, and while there are lots of people making these introductions who've got great expertise from where is China? Somewhere out there, making brains in a dish from bits of skin to genetics to clinical. Actually, you are the real experts. There is huge expertise in this room through lived expertise, lived experience, and we recognise that. So I think it's really important that this is a time where people speak to each other as well as listen to people like that who talk. But we hope that it will be provide lots of short talks of things that we hope will be important from updating you on trials or research advances. But please do speak to each other, because there'll be lots of introduce yourself to somebody you don't know, which is exciting, like some sort of special one of the special groups. But also all the staff who will be introduced in a moment will be very happy to talk to people. So we've also set up a research table set up. So please do visit that there and talk about what research is available and what we would like you to be part of. So I don't want to do too much of a welcome, but I do just want to acknowledge a couple of things. I'd like to acknowledge a lot of people here for huge bravery in coming along and huge generosity as well for us. Some people have had very early morning starts, yesterday even. You know who you are. That's not you. It actually is. And really appreciate this coming together. And to recognise that it's a really, really exciting time, and there'll be lots of things that are research advances and trials, and in a way we're in a place that we really did not think we would be for familial Alzheimer's disease, even five years ago. So that's really exciting, and to remind you that you are a powerful group, that you have more power and influence than you may realise, and you can, not just by taking part in research, by being contact with other, but by influencing policies so that we can change the landscape and the future for people with familial Alzheimer's disease. So that's all I wanted to say. Nikki's going to do some housekeeping chats, is that right?
I think I'm already brought in on this one for the bossy one, aren't I?
We dream of suggesting that, Nikki.
Said normally does. So just some general housekeeping today. If you haven't found the toilets, they're at the back of the room behind us, and there's an assisted toilet as well in the ladies as well. The emergency fire exits, they're here and they're at the front of the building. We aren't expecting a fire alarm for today, so if one does go off, please run after us as quick as possible, and we'll go straight out to the front of the building. We really love your feedback for these meetings, so you will be all emailed a evaluation form and survey later today or maybe on Monday mornings. Please be honest, and please give us your ideas so we can improve things and shape things for the future meetings. It's all about peer support today, so as Nick said, there's lots of you that have come from different places, and we've given you all different dots to put on today, but today is really all about meeting lots of people, so please take advantage of that peer support. Eva is here from the National Brain PR. Eva, just give me away. We've got a lovely picture as well, and you're welcomed as well. But if you want to speak to Eva about any fundraising ideas, we are absolutely so appreciative of all the efforts that you all do. There's been coffee mornings, there's been marathon running in fancy dress. There's been lots of things that have been happening, so if you've got any ideas, Eva will be happy to speak to you. So now my second cognitive assessment of the day. The first one was being on the desk with lots of coloured dots, and this is my second one. So introductions of the staff that are here to help you today. I think most of them don't really need introducing, but here we go. We've got a big long list here. So we've got Nick. Nick, would you like to grab your hands?
Hello.
And Cath, everybody knows Cath as well. Natalie, over here. Emma. Emma is at the back, over there. So Emma is from the research team. Helen, everybody knows Helen as well. Then we've got Phil. Phil here. And Dexter. And then we've got Xin. Dexter. Emily. Emily's been fantastic for organising today. Thank you. I'm here. We've got our poster boy Sarah. And of course we've got Eva from the fundraising team for National Brain Appeal. We've got Jill. Is Jill here? Jill's still on the desk, but a lot of you will know from Jill for many, many years now. Ollie's with us from the research team as well. Charlie.
Charlie's
Sorry, I set you at the front. Natalie said Charlie.
I think he's trying
he's trying to
guide
more people.
exactly. I've already tried to get two American tourists who were looking for me. I got them some of the way before they realised. They said, "I'm just trying to meet my friends." They'll be all friends. Come on.
So we may have some more joining us later.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've got
it's when somebody leaves at this point, realising that they're in the wrong place.
And Briley is going to be joining us at
lunchtime.
Briley lunchtime.
Fantastic. We've also got David from the trials team.
And David from the trials team. David's at the back. He's very shy. He's very shy. Somebody sitting at the back. Should we get him at the front? No, David. So please take advantage of today. Come and talk to any of the staff. We'd all be delighted to speak to you about anything at all. And now it's Helen's cognitive test.
So just jumping in quickly to talk about, very briefly, the coloured dots, and everyone's had an experience of these already when they registered, but just please, it's not a test or an assessment, but please perhaps try and use these dots as an opportunity to connect with others in a similar situation to you at the breaks and at the coffee, and reminders will be put up of what the different dots mean at different times. Let's do it. And then just a brief overview of our agenda today. So there will be a paper copy of the agenda on some chairs, and we've got hopefully a great range of talks today. There'll be some research on learning the latest about trials, or like some information about the different support that's offered via rare dementia support. We're also finishing up with a bit of a slightly dangerously titled Ask Us Anything Q&A session. So we really do encourage you to get involved and use this day to ask us, talk to each other about anything that we have to do with FAD. This year we have a new edition of, as Nick mentioned, a research table just outside in the foyer there that you will have seen. So at the lunch and breaks, please do utilise that as might be helpful to talk to the team about the different research opportunities that are available, and we have a QR code for those feeling particularly high-tech in the room. We also have a paper form for those feeling less high-tech today. So if you scan the QR code on your phone, I'm reliably informed that will enable you to register your interest in taking part in research with the team, just so that you can have a further chat with one of the team at a later point. And then just a reminder that we've got the research tables, and even with the national break, has got a table outside too. So do utilise that to ask questions. Then we have connections cards this year, so a form of business card, I guess, for a meeting like this, a chance to just formally exchange contact details with anyone you might meet today, and encouragement to do so. We don't need paper and pen to do that these days. We've got our phones, but yeah, please do think about who might you like to keep in touch with from today.
one of the research we're doing at the moment, and Ollie's here, and I brought Ollie up here because Ollie's going to be doing the research with the at-risk group. Ollie, do you want to just talk a little bit about it?
Sure. We're here today to drum up some interest for the PPI group, which is going to help us co-design this new intervention that we're developing for people at risk. And we include in that bracket people who both have known status, known positive or known negative, and people who don't know their status yet. And we're currently developing a program for people living with FFTD, and we're in feasibility stage of that now. And we're hoping to, over the next couple of months, try and make a version of that that's going to be fit for purpose for you lovely people as well. And in doing so, we absolutely will need your input and feedback. So there'll be various opportunities to get involved throughout the coming months. But if you're interested in being part of the PPI group, you can see the kind of commitment scale here, and you can see the task there. For those perhaps who don't enjoy reading so much, reviewing materials, suggesting improvements, and acting as a critical friend. Please don't forget the critical part for the research team so that we can develop the program and test it properly. And as it says in the box, the meetings will start in September this year, and it'll happen about every 3 months for a year. I see one hand in the back already. Please.
Ollie, what's PPI?
Well, that's a great question.
Patient and participation involvement. Yeah.
Second question, what's IWARF?
IWARF, Improving Wellbeing in At-Risk Families. Thank you for that. Please don't hesitate to point out other ways I'm doing terribly. Very helpful. Yeah, that's just a little acronym for the name of the program that we're working on. Yes.
And we've got the survey as well, haven't we?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes. So this survey is a shorter term kind of commitment. So if you think, oh, the PPI group starting September next year, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in September next year, but we're keen to be involved. This is to help us design a measure to reflect the personal and financial costs of living at risk of a familial dementia. And again, we'll be recruiting people for this across the different types of status. And the measures that do exist currently aren't really fit for purpose for situations like this. They're not genetic specific, and as we all know, that comes with its own challenges, which can be quite different. So we're hoping to make a better measure, and we need your help to make it. So it's up to 3 times you'll be asked to do this survey to select the items that you think should be in the measure or shouldn't be in the measure. And yeah, it's very much trying to make sure that it reflects what you think is important.
You'll be around at lunchtime.
Well, yes,
so
with
we'll
more prep
put it-
time to talk, because I didn't realise I was talking at this particular moment. So come find me later in the day, and I will hopefully be more cogent, and I'll take down your details and we can chat about it all. But thank you for hearing me ramble.
Okay. There were a few words there in Ollie's slide that people didn't ask him to explain. There were not many. What I'm going to do is just sort of a little bit become a tradition for this meeting, and forgive me, please, those people who've heard it before. But I'm asked to talk a little bit about really the very basics of an introduction to familial Alzheimer's disease, and that's because there are people who are hugely expert and have read everything and know everything, but there are also people who are coming along to this meeting for the first time, or just haven't really wanted to look into things or haven't had the chance to do. So if you forgive me, I'm going to start really assume nothing of anybody, so we're all at the same place, and describe what is familial Alzheimer's disease, and talk a little bit about, which I think Cath will probably do a much better job of talking about treatments and a very rapidly changing landscape, which is a great source of hope that we haven't had before. Hello.
My name.
Hello.
Sorry.
No, please don't apologize. It's lovely to see you. So, I will assume nothing, but nonetheless I've got to cover what could easily be for a 2-hour lecture, and you'll be relieved to know I'm not going to do that. I'll just talk just for a few minutes. But that's really to tee up that if there are things that are not clear, then just let me know in a break or anybody else, and we're very happy to talk through that with you. But before I do that, I wanted just to do a little bit of a, having welcomed all the people out here, I just want to very briefly say just a thought for people who have been to these meetings before and also absent friends. So you probably know who I'm talking about, and we'll just take a moment just to recognise that. There are some other absences in a better way. Emma Harding, who many of you know, has been to these meetings before and has provided support for some people, who are psychologists. How old is her? Is it 10?
Are we going to have
10 days. 10 days old. I thought that's no commitment. I mean, 10 days? She should be here. Anyway, never mind. I wanted just to acknowledge her. And thanks again, huge thanks to Nikki, to Helen, to Emily for huge work it gets us here in the first place. Okay, beginning at the beginning. Familial Alzheimer's disease. That's a rare form of Alzheimer's disease that is inherited. So what is Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer's disease is now the most important cause of dementia, and it often gets mixed up between Alzheimer's and dementia, and in the newspapers and in the public, they're regarded as the same thing. And they're very, very different. So dementia is just a doctor's way, because doctors like to put a fancy name on things. Doctors just mean your brain not working, it's a brain failure thing. And it's no more specific than describing skin failure or anything else. And it's ridiculous that we still have in this country people being diagnosed with dementia. The equivalent of going along to your doctor and being told you've got cancer but not being told anything more, or going along to your doctor with a rash and being told you've got a rash, rather than being told that it's eczema or it's skin cancer or something like that. Dementia is just an umbrella term which just means brain failure, brain not working. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, and it's very age-related normally. So it's much more common in people in their 70s or in their 80s. And it's a disease. Dementia is just a set of symptoms, it's a syndrome. Whereas Alzheimer's disease is a very specific disease. And it has, at its heart, 2 proteins that build up in the brain. One's called amyloid, and the other one's called tau. Amyloid forms in the brain what are called plaques. And this was recognized by Alois Alzheimer, who gave his name to the disease in 1906. Because there's lumps of protein, and that's why they call them plaques, in the brain, that the brain can't digest and get rid of, and they build up. We didn't know, and actually familial Alzheimer's disease taught us a huge lesson about Alzheimer's disease that had not really been recognized before, in that build-up may take 20 years. And the brain does a really great job for 10, 15, 20 years with amyloid building up in the brain and working perfectly well, no problems. But then at some point, it triggers other proteins, including tau, and then brain cells stop working so well and then die. And that leads to the cognitive problems that is the heart of a dementia. So that's Alzheimer's disease. And for centuries, it's been recognized that very rarely it looks like Alzheimer's runs in families. Actually, because we're all living longer, nearly everybody in this country has a member of their family with Alzheimer's disease. But that's usually somebody in their 70s or 80s. And it was recognized centuries ago that there were families where it seemed to affect people at a younger age, 50 or 60. It seemed to occur more than by chance. And the first gene that proved it was genetic rather than just chance was discovered in 1991. In fact, there's a television program with features the Jennings family and John Hardy on Monday night, BBC 2 at 9 p.m, which tells the story of that journey and recognises just how much families like Carol Jennings' family have contributed to the research and have moved not just understanding of familial Alzheimer's disease on, and moved it towards us finding treatments. I mean, not just understanding, but that understanding being transformed into real positive, effective treatments. We'll hear more about that. So that journey of recognizing that there are these genetic causes started in 1991 with the first gene. One of the great injustices, people may have heard me say this before, it was called the London mutation, because it was found here by colleagues, Martin Rosser, John Hardy and others, in London. The injustice is the family from Nottingham. It should have been called the Nottingham mutation, but you know, nothing's fair in life, is it? So that was the first, and that first gene was called amyloid precursor protein. So you've heard the word amyloid more than once now. An amyloid precursor protein turned out to be the gene that coded for, or was a recipe for, amyloid. So our genes are, if you like, recipes for everything that make us what we are. Every bit of us has been coded for, has a recipe for in our genetic material. Hello. And if you have an error in that recipe, some of the proteins are made slightly differently. And we make errors in our proteins, in our genes all the time, and most of the time that's not damaging. But just occasionally, the error in the recipe, if you just imagine doing something wrong in a recipe, many things don't really make any difference, but there are a few things that do. You miss out a vital ingredient or something changes. And these genetic mutations, which just means error, makes a change in the protein that does have consequences. This is charming. Not there, I promise. So, if you have an error in this gene, in one of these genes that makes the protein not work as it should, you then get a buildup of amyloid in the brain and all these other consequences that lead, that I just described, of other proteins and then cells dying. And that would happen when you were 80 or 90 or 100 or whatever. But because of these different errors in the mutation, it happens earlier. It might happen at 60 or at 50 or at 40 or even at 30 at a much earlier range. And there are 3 genes we now know where an error makes a difference if it's in the wrong place in the recipe. Amyloid precursor protein, which was the first that was found, and then preselin 1, which it turns out to count for the greatest number of families with familial Alzheimer's disease, and then a much rarer form called preselin 2. And preselin just means early onset, which is why it was called that, because it was recognized as a gene that called pre-senile Alzheimer's disease. So those 3 genes are responsible for familial Alzheimer's disease. And there are different mutations, and there are some which are common, where many people have them, and then there are some which 1 or 2 families in the world have. But they are all in a part of the recipe that makes a difference. So that's the basics of genetics. Now, how is it inherited? We each get, for any one of these genes, APP, preselin 1 or 2, we get a copy from our mum and a copy from our dad. And this means that you can inherit, let's say your mum had Alzheimer's disease and had familial Alzheimer's due to a genetic mutation, you can inherit either their good gene or their bad gene. Just to take a little step back for a moment, because people may have heard something called autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease referred to. That's another word for familial Alzheimer's disease. And I'll just break up what each of those words means. Autosomal means it's not sex-linked. And I've met many families who say, well, in my family it just affects the women or the men, and that's rubbish. It's just chance. And all of these genes are autosomal, they're not sex-linked. So whether you're male or female, you have exactly the same chance if you were in a family than your brother or sister or whatever. So that's the first thing to say. And then the dominant bit, autosomal dominant. Dominant means you only need one faulty gene. There are some illnesses like cystic fibrosis where you need 2 faulty genes because the other one can compensate. And unfortunately, in familial Alzheimer's disease, all you need is one faulty gene. And even if you've got the good gene from your mum or your dad alongside it, it can't pick up the slack or doesn't compensate for it completely. So that's autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease or familial Alzheimer's disease, which means that any person who carries a gene has a 50% chance of passing it on to their children. And if passed on, what we always used to say was, it's almost certain that if you've got this faulty gene, that it causes illness in your mum or your dad, then it's almost certain that you will get a similar illness at a similar age. And a really exciting, and I actually think a source of hope, is we've recognized recently that it's not always the case. And there are a number of people in families who seem to get the disease much, much later, or in rare cases, not at all. And we thought, oh well, there's been a mistake with the genetic testing. They really were negative rather than positive. Those have been double and triple checked. And what it turns out is if you have a completely separate gene abnormality or variant, you can compensate. And we didn't think that was possible. And the first report was an absolute, shock to the scientific field when there was somebody who was in their 70s, where everybody else in their family got this illness through Colombia, where there's a big, big family, got it at age 40 or 45, and this person was 17 living well. But there's since then been several reports, and it does, if you just have the right cocktail of other genes, rarely you can compensate for this. So I always tell people in clinic, I'm sure Cath does the same, you have to expect, if this gene is inherited, that you would get at a similar age. But it's no longer 100%. There is a chance that you might not, or you might get it much later. Now that is important for those rare people who have that compensated thing, but what it is, it's also another way that research says, okay, if nature can do this with these genes, maybe we can work out what these protective factors are and how they work, and then delay onset by 10, 20 or more years. So that's a great source of hope. So that leads me on to where we are with our treatments. And it's still, honestly, it gives me slight goosebumps to say this. I've said to families, perhaps people in this room from many years ago, we're making great progress with research, we're understanding the disease, we know now there's this long period where amyloid builds up in the brain, and we've got great research programs. And treatments will be there soon. And then I see people next year, and they look expectantly, and I say, well, they'll still be there soon. We now have at least 2 therapies that are the real deal. These are based upon using antibodies, what your body naturally makes to fight off infection, like COVID. And it gives people antibodies against the amyloid. And these studies have been going on. We were part of the very first vaccination study, which shockingly is 25 years ago. It's taken 25 years. But now there are 2 therapies that really show, not only do they dramatically remove the amyloid in the brain, these clumps of protein that the body can't get rid of. And it tells the body, hey, this is foreign, you need to get rid of it, we need to get rid of it with these antibodies, and it attacks it. So those anti-amyloid therapies remove amyloid that's been building up over 20 years in about 18 months. In a decent proportion of people in the trials. And now 2 of the studies have shown a slowing of progression, not just removing the amyloid, but a slowing of progression of cognitive problems by between sort of 25% and 35%, depending on the different measures. So we hope that this will be like the first treatments for cancer, or the first treatments for HIV, where they were difficult to take, they had side effects, and they weren't wonderful. But the next generation is even better, and the next better than better. So that's the hope. And that is why you're also important. The familial Alzheimer's disease is given more to research and to therapies than just about being a tiny, rare minority than the rest of Alzheimer's, in my view, patients put together. So I think that the society holds a great debt of gratitude to all those people who take part in research, including people who are brave enough to come to this meeting and hear me talk. So I'm going to hand over to Cath, who will take on the story from that.
Morning everyone, it's fantastic to be here. It's great to see so many familiar faces and new faces. I just wanted to echo, first of all, what Nick said about how invaluable the time you give, the commitment you give, the information you give is to us, because we wouldn't have those two drugs, for starters, if it wasn't for that information and that help and that commitment. And we wouldn't have what I'm going to talk about now, which is the possibility for new drugs and prevention. So, thank you. Now, when I first started talking about this at this meeting, I would give a fairly short talk, but I've now got too much to say, which is brilliant, but forgive me if I go really quickly. Come find me later and I can talk about things, but there's a lot going on, which is, that's what we want. We want a lot going on. And just put this up just briefly. Nick mentioned that we found out from familial Alzheimer's disease that you start to see amyloid build up 20 years before you get symptoms. And we found that out from familial Alzheimer's disease. It's taught us about ordinary Alzheimer's disease as well, but it also teaches us about a window of opportunity where, especially if we know almost 100% that somebody is going to get the problems, we can start to try and prevent earlier on. And this is just the different areas or stages of Alzheimer's that we might think about trying treatments, and we are trying treatments. So for a long time, we were just trying treatments when people had symptoms, so that's over here, when people had memory problems, or perhaps people progressed into dementia. And that was in Alzheimer's disease mainly, but when we started to look at trials in familial Alzheimer's disease, we could predict when people were going to get problems, so we could start looking at trying to prevent those symptoms in the first place. We could try to treat earlier because we knew that there were going to be difficulties, so we could start to give treatments with the understanding that we were trying to prevent something. And now, and I'll come back to this, what if we go even earlier, before people start to build up amyloid in the brain? If we know it's going to happen, what about we try and prevent that ever happening in the first place, and prevent the disease happening in the first place? And I'll come back to that in a second, but those are the three areas that we try and think about using treatments in. Now, apologies, this is a very complicated slide, but there's a reason for that. So many of you will have heard about the DIAN-TU prevention trial platform. So many of you are either involved in it, or you are in the interest groups and you see the webinars. So this has now been going for 12 years on the back of something that Nick and Randy Bateman and others set up as the observational cohort. Earlier than that, we started trialing treatments in familial Alzheimer's disease back in 2012. The very first trial that we did, Carol Jennings, who you heard about earlier, who, and with her family, gave so much in terms of our understanding and changed what we do. I had the honour to put her into that very first trial, which was a real privilege. And her family remained very committed, which is fantastic, and you'll see their discussion and their journey on Monday if you watch that programme. So the very first trial was of two of those anti-amyloid therapies that Nick has described. One was called solanezumab and one was called gantenerumab. And that trial was a long trial. People here that have been in that trial are looking at Sophie because She spent many years in that trial. This was a huge commitment. You're in it for 7 years. It's a long time. But this was the very first time that we were trying to prevent symptoms. And that's way earlier than in the sporadic non-genetic Alzheimer's disease. So very first trial. And as I said, it was a long time. There were an awful lot of measurements, both cognitive measurements, physical measurements, and treatment on a monthly basis, either with an injection or an injection under the skin. Now, that trial taught us a huge amount, taught us how to do these trials in the first place. It taught us that we can remove amyloid from the brain. It taught us that it was safe to do this in people that were at risk of developing symptoms. One of those 2 drugs showed a clear effect. It removed amyloid in the brain and it changed other measures within the spinal fluid that showed us changes in the brain. But it didn't translate into changes in people's cognition, and there are reasons why we thought that was. It was a small trial. They changed the doses later in the trial. There were many things we learned. But because there was this biological effect, we then went on to trial that drug, gantenerumab, which is the anti-amyloid antibody, and see what happened if we gave this to everybody that was in the trial. So in this case, they all got the drug. See what happened over a longer period of time. So everyone continued to take the drug, and over that period of time, the drug was gradually increased to a higher dose. We finished that trial in March of this year. And database locked is one of those phrases that sounds terribly geeky. Basically, everybody in the trial really excited because we've got all of the information that we need and that we were trying to get from that trial, from people that were in that trial. We haven't got the formal results yet, but what we have got is the first inkling that perhaps giving these treatments early is delaying onset in one group of people in that trial. And we need to look at that information really carefully and analyse the whole thing. That could take months. But maybe we're seeing that these anti-amyloid therapies can delay onset. So that's where we need more work to see what happens. In addition, we want to be able to continue to offer people treatment that have given so many years in these trials, and we want to see what happens over a longer period of time. So those people that have been in these trials now for a number of years are given the opportunity to go into a new trial. This hasn't started yet, but it's going to start in coming months. And what happens here is, again, people will know that they get drug, and what they get is one of the 2 drugs that Nick was just talking about, something called lecanemab, which we know in standard Alzheimer's disease can slow the course of the disease. The aim here is to continue people on that drug up to 7 years. So, I mean, to be honest, for as long as they want to continue on it, because this, again, is a long commitment. And we're going to try and make that a much more light touch trial. Because trials involve a lot of visits, a lot of cognitive assessments, a lot of imaging. This will be much less than that. It'll be much more like having a drug in clinic. But you will still be in the observation study, so you will still have annual visits and potentially 6-month visits. So this is something that, again, gives us more information about when we give these drugs. What happens over that longer period? How do we see things build up over time in terms of protection, or do we see that it gives a limited period of improvement? What happens? So this is due to start in the States in June. It'll start here probably Q3, so in the autumn. And there are a number of people that are thinking about going into this trial. Obviously, we have discussions with them about the pros and cons and the commitment that they require. That's the anti-amyloid therapies that we're looking at the moment. I'll come back to one more at the end, but I wanted to move to the second protein that Nick mentioned. So we have amyloid treatments and we have tau treatments. And the DIAN-TU platform is looking at all of these. So I mentioned firstly the anti-amyloid therapies, but the tau protein, unlike amyloid, which starts to build up 20 years before you get symptoms, tau starts to build up as you get symptoms, and it correlates really closely with the severity of those symptoms and the spread of the disease. And so perhaps this is something that's really equally important to target. perhaps we should be looking at combinations against amyloid and tau. And so within the DIAN platform, we started looking at anti-tau treatments. Again, this is an antibody, so these antibodies that lock up the thing that shouldn't be here, instead of amyloid, this antibody, E2814, catchy name, tries to knock up tau as it spreads from cell to cell in the brain. That's the aim, so that it can prevent that disease progression. And there have been a number of these drugs over time, and we learn over time. So the initial generation of anti-tau drugs that were immunotherapies didn't show a positive result. However, they were targeting a particular bit that wasn't really part of that pathological disease-causing part of tau. That's what we believe. And so we've learned, and now we've developed an immunotherapy. And this is developed in University College London with a drug company, Eisai, which is fantastic. So it's a partnership where we developed a drug. We've learned that you need to target a bit that is part of that seeding bit of tau to actually try and prevent it spreading. And so this drug, E2814, is something that we started now about a year ago looking at this in people with at risk of autosomal Alzheimer's disease, so familial Alzheimer's disease. This trial here is a very small trial that's not part of that platform. This was the precursor to the platform. And what we did was we tried in an early study, so this is where we're trying to make sure it's safe, and we're trying to see if it actually does what we want it to do. Is it Ronseal? Does it cut down the levels of tau in the brain? And so we put a total of 7 people. You see how tiny the numbers are here. So in this study, we put a total of 7 people in and wanted to see what happens when you increase dose over time. And continued them over 2 years on this drug. Everybody got drug in this trial. In a lot of trials, that's not the case. It's placebo or active. But in this one, everybody got drug and we wanted to see, is it safe? Does it reduce tau? And that's just what we did in the UK, so we don't need to worry about that. Basically, we dosed the first person in the world in the UK and at UCL, and we entered 5 out of the 7 people that were in the trial in total in that first cohort. So thank you, everybody that was involved. And it does what it says it's going to do so far. So the early results, which were at a conference last year, suggest that it can reduce levels of tau, unlike those previous drugs. So that's really promising. Obviously, we need to see whether that means something in terms of slowing down what happens to people with their cognitive difficulties, but that isn't a promising result. And so what's really exciting is we've now been able to put that drug into the bigger DIAN-TU platform. So the circle here, in the second part of this platform, is the anti-tau drugs. What we're trying to look at is a number of different drugs. We're trying to move tau, change tau, decrease production of tau, to see if that changes disease. And the very first one of those that we're doing is using that drug I just mentioned to you, but using it in a different way. So Nick told you about the treatments that we now have, that we know have some effect in Alzheimer's disease. So in this case, we're giving the anti-tau drug in combination with one of those drugs. So everybody gets the anti-amyloid therapy and either the anti-tau therapy or a placebo. Now, the aim of that really is because if we have treatments that are out there, then shouldn't we be trying to use those in combination in what we're doing in this trial? Secondly, we need to understand these combinations. Nick mentioned HIV. One of the things we do in HIV is give multiple drugs in combination, and that's when things really change. So perhaps we should be thinking about the same thing in a really complex disease. And, really importantly, we think that might give us a better chance of success if we're giving these drugs at the same time. Of course, the problem is it makes things more complicated, but that's the way of the world. So we just need to manage that when we're understanding the results. And this trial, again, these trials are long because we're trying to see a change over time in something that is often not yet causing symptoms. So that takes a long period of time, which is a huge commitment. But we have now started doing home visits in all of our trials, which means that it's much less, hopefully, onerous than it is without those. And I won't go through that because it's a complicated study, but essentially what happens is you get drug, amyloid drug, plus or minus tau drug in different combinations depending on whether you have symptoms or not symptoms. We've just completed the trial. So we now need to complete the follow-up visits. We've completed recruitment. Follow-up visits will take another couple of years and then we'll get results. So it takes time for results. I'm showing you this because I'm not competitive at all. This is us, right? So this is WashU, the lead, this is us, and I think we're doing pretty well. South America is just ridiculous. So there are other drugs being thought about in these anti-tau treatments. There's lots that we're looking at. Some of those are genetic therapies, some of those are vaccines. And we need to consider all of them in their merit, and actually we're spoiled for choice these days, which is brilliant. So we just need to make sure we've got the absolute best possible chance of these being successful. And what we do as well is try and make sure we understand the drugs as clearly as possible before we put them into a lot of people in that platform trial. Just want to mention Ross Patterson briefly, who many of you may have met, who is pioneering new methods for really working out in an individual what happens to the levels of these proteins when you give a drug. And the detail of this doesn't really matter but at this point in time, but what that means is you can work out what the drug does in that individual and what the dosing should be, which is one of the problems we've had with trials in the past. I think this is critical to really optimizing what we do in our trials. And this is just due to start in the coming months, and will be a very small number of people who will go into this to help really inform what we do. Last thing I briefly want to mention, I realise I'm doing what I said I wouldn't do to go over time, is talk about primary prevention. So I mentioned secondary prevention, which is those first arms, the anti-amyloid arms and the anti-tau arms. But what about if we can stop that amyloid building up in the first place? What about if we go even earlier? And you see, this is before people have symptoms up to 25 years old. So we've been talking about this trial for a long time, so a lot of you will know about this. But what about if we can prevent that amyloid and therefore prevent that disease? And so the primary prevention trial is trying to do that in people that have very little or no amyloid in the brain in the first place. Somebody's telling me that I've been talking too long. Very sensible timekeeper in the corner. So, this is an anti-amyloid drug, which makes sense, because the only thing in the brain that's starting at that point 20 years before is amyloid, right? And this is a drug called Remternetug. That's a really difficult name to say and to remember. So donanemab was one of the two drugs that Nick mentioned earlier, one of those two drugs that's shown an effect. This is one of those, but instead of having to have an infusion, you get an injection, you can self-inject under the skin. So it's way easier to give, it's much less onerous. And so this trial, again, will be initially, you either get drug or placebo, and then after that, everybody gets drug. It will be a number of years long. It's due to start in the coming months, so we're very excited because we've been waiting for this for a long time. And I think this is the first time anybody's tried to actually prevent disease in the first place of symptoms. So this is really exciting. And again, thank you to all those people that are thinking about taking part in this trial. So really, there is a lot going on, and there's even more planned, so there's only going to be more opportunity for us to work together on these things, and I want this to be something where we think about working together. This is a team, and the team is everybody in this room. So there's a lot going on in anti-amyloid treatments, in trying to prevent symptoms in those with disease, and trying to prevent the disease in the first place, the amyloid building up. And there will be lots of opportunities. Please talk to me or Dave or anybody else if you want to hear any more about the trials. And just thank you to everyone, especially you, to take part in all of these. Thank you.
Ollie is a consultant neurologist and has been working with us on the FAD team for many years. And he has got some exciting new observational study updates for us.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. Yeah, great to see everyone today. I realised earlier that it's 10 years since I first came to this meeting, so it's privileged to keep coming back and to see many familiar faces, but also meet some new people. So, slight change of tack from this morning. So, I'm going to talk more about what we term observational research that we do at UCL, which many of you have very generously been involved in over the years. So, by observational, we're not giving a drug, but we are observing the condition through many different tests, scans, and various other things to try to really understand what is happening and when it's happening, and most importantly, how we can measure that. And it's because of these types of studies that we know, for example, amyloid, that's 20 years before and what happens from there. So if we don't know these things, we can't design trials of new medications, so we don't know when to give those medications. And I'm going to talk about a couple of kind of new studies that are going to be rolled out where they use new technology. But before I do that, particularly because many people are new, we thought it might be useful just to give a little overview of where we've been to over the life of this, about what we call a longitudinal study, which spans for over 30 years now. And has been led primarily by Martin, who many people know, who set up our department, and by Nick. And it's really contributed in a huge way to a lot of our current understanding of FAD, and also all the way up to the new treatments, which is some of the discoveries that were made early on have kind of contributed to the chain of events that's led to that. So over the years, UCL, firstly, we identified the first, not me personally, identified the first mutation, as Nick was saying earlier, through Carol Jennings getting in contact with Martin speaking to John Hardy, the geneticist at UCL, and then from that cemented our understanding of FAD, and from there research could be done, which has led on to test and better treatments. There's been lots of work on brain scanning and identifying very tiny structural changes within the brain, which was really in the early days pioneered by Nick, and other people, including myself, have been able to contribute to that as well. We've developed increasingly more sensitive cognitive tests to detect changes earlier. Because we can, if we're going to do a trial, a preventative trial, we can just ask or check if someone's memory is okay, how they're doing in daily life. We need tests that are much more subtle, pick up much more subtle changes. So we're kind of working with the visits that people come to try to establish all of these things. Our group is one of the first studies using amyloid PET in FAD, quite a few years ago now. That's a very widely used now measure to visualize amyloid in the brain. Several people are able to have had one of those on many of those scans. And in most recent years, we've been harnessing new potential of blood tests, which many people will have heard about, which offer really huge potential in testing much more frequently on a wide scale to detect multiple different changes. And it's really, as I say, been led by Martin and Nick, but a lot of other people have contributed along the way. In more recently, in the last 10 or 15 years, myself, Natalie, have become quite heavily involved, but really the team effort. And that brings me on to our current longitudinal observational study, which many people have been involved in. So this is a study which, as you say, not everyone wants to be or can be, for whatever reason, in a drug trial, but this is a way where people can contribute in a really valuable way to our understanding of the condition and to our ongoing research. So people will come usually just for 1 day a year, 1 to 2 days, and sometimes it's less frequent than that for certain people. And they'll meet a doctor. So this study is really driven primarily on a day-to-day basis by Iona and Helen, but with support from Dexter and Xin on the medical side, for Dilek and Ollie on the neuropsychology side. They'll have an MRI scan, or as some people have done over the last year, we have the option now of a second MRI scan as well, which uses a really novel new scanner that gives us much more detailed pictures, have some blood tests, have some psychology testing, all done across 1 or sometimes 2 days, to help us understand what changes occur, when they begin, how we can best detect these changes and track them, to ultimately tell us how we can improve our design of clinical trials, particularly when we start doing more preventative trials. And that's our kind of core kind of structure of how we do things. But there's some kind of newer things that we're trying to do, particularly something I'm interested in is trying to develop tests and to validate tests that are in some ways more hands-off, so we can use the new digital technologies to detect things more, just as sensitively, but in a more remote way that involves less time for researchers and most importantly, less time and travelling for research individuals. And I'm just going to talk about a couple of those things, which we're going to hopefully, all being well, roll out over the next few months, just in a couple of slides. So, firstly, Nick touched on this a little bit earlier. A few years ago now, a study that Nick and I did was to try and improve the way, or increase the sensitivity way, we can detect very subtle changes in memory before any changes become apparent otherwise. This study got quite a bit of press coverage at the time, but we essentially did something quite simple. We just expanded how long we're asking people to remember information. So normally we'd ask people to learn something or remember something over 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. But if we asked someone to remember that over many more days, suddenly we found, perhaps slightly unexpectedly, that we were able to detect changes much, much earlier. And these were people who had done 2 hours of psychology testing and everything was normal. So it was only by doing this we found a difference. We thought, well, maybe we could take this forward and this could be something that could be used in an observational study of people who are still many years before onset and would otherwise be found to be normal. The problem was, it was time consuming. So people had to come for a visit away from their normal visit. They had to have follow-up assessments over the following days, and it wasn't really practical to think that someone would be willing to do this on a repeated basis or to be in a clinical trial. So what we're now trying to do, working with some colleagues in America who've got a lot of experience in this area, we're moving this onto a smartphone platform, where people can just do some activities on the phone over a few days, no more than 12 minutes per day, and we think it could be the start at least of building a very strong tool for early detection of memory. And this is something which people can download when they come for a visit and just do that over the subsequent few days. And we should hopefully have some written information that people can look at over the next few months before we roll that out. But this links onto the second remote digital study that we're going to try to introduce, because we know one of the things which affects how well we consolidate new memories, which is what this is really testing, is how well some people are sleeping, because that's when a lot of our new memories are formed and consolidated during sleep. And so we'd like to also do a study, again a digital study, a remote study, of measurement of sleep. So sleep is something that has only really in the last few years become recognised as potentially, I say potentially because we're still trying to understand it, play a role in certain conditions, certain degenerative conditions, which would include Alzheimer's potentially. Because we think from certain studies done in other ways that amyloid can potentially disrupt someone's sleep, but also amyloid may be cleared more during sleep. So people who, so when our sleep is disrupted, we're not clearing the amyloid, and it can kind of go around in a cycle like that. Again, the problem has been that if people want to measure sleep, either we just give someone a questionnaire to fill out, it's very imprecise, it's kind of subjective, or we ask someone to come to a hospital or a research department, have lots of things linked up to them, sticks on their head, and stay there for 1 or 2 days. It's a very artificial environment. It's just a snapshot of 1 or 2 days of their sleep, and they're not at home, they're in a strange place. But now we have this new technology, which is very exciting. It's being developed, well, we're doing it in collaboration with colleagues at Imperial, whereby by putting a sensor, not on the bed, we don't lie on the sensor, but underneath the mattress, so you don't even know the sensor's there, they can detect very subtle changes in pressure that has been validated to show changes and measure read-offs of heart rate, breathing rate, of movements in bed occupancy, and from some studies that have been done in people much later, not in familial age, but much later in the condition, there seems to be, we seem to be able to combine things to produce a measure which is sensitive to the condition. Now, what we want to do is see whether we can do that at a really early stage when there's no obvious changes. And again, if this can be done in someone's home without them even noticing it, then clearly that would be great. It can give, you can work through Wi-Fi or cellular signal, goes underneath the mattress, completely unobtrusive. You could leave it there, put it in there, leave it there for a year if you want to. Just keep getting the information, and it probably say it would always be analysed in a completely anonymised way. So how does sleep change? When does it change? How can we relate this to the other brain changes that we see on scans and on blood tests and on other tests? So hopefully, we think that these two tests, while not requiring a lot of time, can be potentially a valuable way of moving into a more remote digital sphere. And that, I think, was everything I wanted to say. There is another exciting study that we're going to be rolling out with a separate Xin, which is purposely why I didn't talk about it. But yeah, happy to answer questions, but also very happy for people to send me an email at any time to ask about this or anything else.
So I'm delighted to introduce Xin now. She's another neurologist working with us on another really exciting and very novel technique that we've just brought into our research program just 2 months ago. I will let you explain it because you're a much better justice than me. But again, it's all about detecting things in a much more sensitive manner.
Thanks so much, Natalie. It's great to meet everybody. Okay, thank you. So some of you may have met me already as one of the study doctors from the FAD team. It's my pleasure to introduce to you this new project that we have, which I've been working with Professor Fox, Dr. Ryan, and Felix. And it can't happen without the support of many of the staff of the FAD team, like Erina, Helen, and Emily. So we're trying to catch brainwaves and tag thoughts in familial Alzheimer's disease using a scanner called magnetoencephalography, or MEG for short. And part of my motivation for taking part in this study is that symptoms matter. Because Alzheimer's disease is ultimately devastating due to the symptoms and underlying brain dysfunction. And by brain function and dysfunction here, I mean the performance of the brain in real time from second to second. It's a bit like symptoms, how that can change second to second as well. So earlier on in disease, there may be small amounts of brain dysfunction, but the rest of our brain, the theory goes, may compensate for it. But eventually, as dysfunction accumulates, we get more symptoms. So you have seen some amazing work being done in genetics and proteins, but it's a little bit harder to study brain function because early on, changes in brain function and symptoms can be quite subtle and difficult to detect. For example, struggling at work may be a symptom, but it can also be situational from being sleep deprived because there's a new baby in the picture, work roles changing, so it could be quite difficult to tell apart. So we want to know, is there a biomarker which would directly look at brain function, and that if there are symptoms, help us explain whether that could be related to Alzheimer's or not. So to tackle this problem, we're taking some ideas from neuroscience, and we know that brain function and thinking is made possible by the combined electrical activity of brain cells, which we'll call here brain waves for short. And here is an example trace of a brain wave from someone for 5 minutes. It looks rather complex, but actually when you zoom in, there are sort of longer brain waves there, and we think that's from brain cells communicating to each other at sort of over longer distances, and shorter brain waves from sort of shorter distances. So these brain waves work very rapidly up to sort of in the scale of milliseconds, and they are synchronized. So I like to think of this as musicians in a jazz band. So each of them could be a brain cell, and they have their own instruments and their own scores put together. They make a coherent whole, and that's what we perceive. And these brain cells and brain waves, they work constantly to revise and organize the information around us. And a lot of the time, we're not even aware of it, so they're doing it in our unconscious. And of course, somewhere in there, hiding in this brainwave may be meaning. So, a set of keys that we may have accidentally misplaced, or maybe the idea of a friend or a loved one. In Alzheimer's disease, you've heard about the proteins that accumulate, which could lead to cell damage and then degeneration of the cells. Or in parallel, the brain cells, their ability to make these brain waves may be affected. So it could be slowed, they could become out of sync, and that would result in symptoms. So this is what we propose to do. We want to measure the brain waves in real time using MEG. And here is a photo of what a MEG machine will look like. You sit in the chair and there will be this headpiece. Hiding in the headpiece are very sensitive sensors that pick up weak magnetic fields made by the electrical activity of your brain cells. And on the left there is a schematic of the sensors. There's more than 270 of them, and they collect about more than 1,000 data points per second. So in a 42-minute scan, you're getting more than 1 billion data points. And of course, it's not a passive process. There's a screen in front of you, so we actually show you pictures and sort of see what your brainwaves are doing when you're resting or when you're actively looking at pictures and thinking. And that's known to change in sort of healthy controls already. And then we want to go beyond that. We want to see if there's any meaning that we can get from the brainwaves. We want to be able to tag thought. And this is how we're going to do this. So we will show you pictures of objects and record the unique brainwaves that happen as a response. So for example, a picture of a giraffe would elicit a particular pattern of brainwaves compared to a picture of a rose, it would be slightly different. And then we would train the computer algorithm, so there's a bit of machine learning here, to recognize the unique brainwaves of this particular person, so that later on when we show the algorithm a sort of unlabeled patch of brainwave, it could recognize most likely a giraffe as being shown as opposed to another picture. And here are some example results from another study that uses a similar setup. So the peakiness of these plots represent how well our algorithm can tell what the brainwave is corresponding to, whether it be a rose or a giraffe. And they could recognize these pictures quite well. So after we've tagged these thoughts, we want to follow them as they move around the mind. We know this happens because when we first perceive a picture of a rose, our brain actually concentrates on the color and the shape of the rose, and then within about a few hundred milliseconds, it shifts into the meaning of the rose, and the brainwaves change slightly. And then later on, when we're resting, or the idea of a rose comes back, we can see that. So I think this is quite relevant to the idea of how thoughts are lost in Alzheimer's disease. So it'll be really good to look at that in the disease as well. And we want to know how the organizational thinking is affected. So we know that our brain's not just good at remembering separate pictures, but also at sort of structuring them. Here, we can structure them 1, 2, 3, 4, and that could be affected in the disease as well. And lastly, we want to see how thoughts and brain function changes with time by doing a repeat scan in 1 year. And this will also help us work out what's individual within our participants. And lastly, we want to relate our sort of more cutting-edge findings to other tests being done, so neuropsychology blood tests, to have a more comprehensive idea of the disease. So just to recap, we're the first in the world to use MEG thought tagging for Alzheimer's research. And the goal here is rather ambitious, but I think we have to be, to find a biomarker for early brain function changes before symptoms appear, and also once symptoms do appear, relate them to brain dysfunction. And in the future, we hope maybe this technology could be used to measure how medications improve brain function, and it could offer an alternative approach to questionnaires and biochemical markers, and it could be personalized. So thank you very much for your attention. We are looking for volunteers who are asymptomatic or have mild cognitive impairment, and this scan is completely safe. There's no radiation or magnetic fields being applied to you, and will cover costs. Thank you very much.
It's my real pleasure to introduce Jill Walton. Jill is a very old friend who many of you will remember, who's been coming along to these support group meetings for many years. We started these back in 2010, and the very first meeting was me and Seb and Nick, and then a few years later Jill came along and really transformed things in running the support groups and being the first point of contact for many of the families we see. And now she has a whole new role within Brain Dementia Support, which I think will tell us about, and some of the incredible work that you've been doing.
Just while Jill, I didn't want to fiddle with them before, but I was thinking whether we turn out the front row of lights, not that one, but I thought it would just be very disruptive. Oh, I don't want to do that. So just if we needed, I was thinking, as Xin was talking, I was thinking, you took that lovely description, I have to say, of all those brainwaves, and I thought if I turned the lights off in the middle of that, you'd all have thought something had been done with your brainwaves. I was just trying to see whether it helped with the lights.
Finished? I'm not so sure about the very old friend. Thank you. So yeah, obviously Jill and some really familiar faces in the room, but also some new. So thank you very much for letting me be with you today. The title of our presentation for the next few minutes is, as you can see, The Road Less Travelled, Our Journey with Grief and Loss. And that relates entirely to the name of a programme which we developed with members of Red Dementia Support and colleagues, which unpacks some of the challenges of living with a diagnosis of rare dementia and the grief and loss that we experience all along that disease journey. Recognising and accepting that grief and loss is part of the journey is a really important sort of start point in any conversation. And one of the things that we spend some time on right at the beginning of the programme is unpacking a little bit about what grief means and is. And as we can see here on the slide, we begin by kind of affirming that it's not limited to losing somebody at the end of life. Grief is not limited to losing somebody at the end of life. But I want to stop at that point and really affirm and recognise the very significant and raw and painful grief that absolutely is present at the end of life. And I want to acknowledge that everybody in the room, I'm sure, is building a life around very significant losses, bereavements, and the grief that they hold. And really to acknowledge also that I'm aware there have been recent bereavements amongst us in this room, and just to collectively offer, I think, between all of us and to each of us, our sincere condolences and sympathy and heartfelt regards, love and thoughts to one another whenever that bereavement may have been for all of us. It's not limited to that bereavement and that loss that comes at the end of life, and it doesn't occur in a series of 7 set stages, does it? We can move in and out of stages, up and down, around and back to front, and we can end up where we started within the space of minutes, let alone days, weeks, months and years. So not straightforward. And as we've just confirmed, can occur in the aftermath of losing anything that we perceive as significant. And so I think it can be helpful to just redefine perhaps our understanding of grief. And throughout the programme that I mentioned briefly at the beginning, we feel that this definition on the left captures sort of our best effort really at defining what grief is. That it involves strong feelings of sadness or distress, especially in response to a perceived significant loss. And perceived is really important, I think, in the definition there, because if it's real to you, it's real.
It might not be recognisable to anybody else, but if it's a loss to you, it's a real loss, and you will grieve it in one way or another. It's not just about our feelings and our emotions, it is in varying degrees cognitive, behavioural, physical and spiritual. So it can affect the way we think, the way our memory works, the way our planning works, the way our decision making works. It can affect the way we behave, the way that we feel. We may feel sick, we may have headaches, we may not sleep. And ultimately it can be, as the slide says, a spiritual experience. It can really kind of cause us to question those big things in life. Why me? Why us? What's it all about? It can really, really unravel a whole lot of very significant and important questions for us. And the other sort of definition up on the slide there is by a lady called Darcy Harris, who I think really emphasises very well how loss is not just about the loss at the end of life, but the losses we live with all the way through. So sometimes what dies might be our hopes or dreams, a relationship, or an ability that's no longer readily accessible in the way it was before. And I'm sure that for all of us in this room and beyond, there's a certain poignancy to that reflection. I just wanted to pull out a couple of other concepts that really can impact the way that our grief is affected, especially when we're living with an ongoing diagnosis, which obviously we all are, and we're living with a rare dementia diagnosis or at risk of one, or supporting and loving somebody who is. So the first is just to mention the concept of ambiguous loss, which can kind of impact things in quite a significant way. This is the loss that occurs when a person is still physically present, but psychologically, emotionally, socially or behaviourally perhaps very different for a whole variety of reasons. But to the onlooker looking in, the person is still here and often looks very much the same, despite some huge changes in those other very significant domains of their personhood. That anticipatory grief is the grief we feel in relation to losses that we know or anticipate will lie ahead, and almost the kind of preparing that we do in advance for losses that we anticipate will be further down the line for each of us. And I tend to think of chronic sorrow as a kind of layering almost, the ongoing response to losses that are continual in nature. So this kind of building up, which of course over weeks, months and years builds up a huge residue of kind of loss that we're holding. And disenfranchised grief refers really to what happens when we're managing all the above three, a grief that isn't necessarily experienced by society around us, when our losses and our grief isn't necessarily recognised socially, and yet to us it's so very real, but we often don't feel there's a place to talk about it, to share it, or to expand upon it. And as ever, real life quotes explain concepts far, far better than textbooks ever do. And these quotes, or sort of mixed quotes, come from members of our support group in response to discussions about these kind of concepts. And so just to kind of put them into language which makes sense, I think. Chronic sorrow. With these diseases, you experience different losses all along the journey, one after another. Anticipatory grief. She says she wants to see our daughter graduate, but I'm not sure she'll even see her start university. And then with ambiguous loss, he looks so well and still so physically fit. People tell us all the time how well he looks, and yet he isn't at all well, really. He's got an untreatable progressive disease. How could that be wellness? Other people struggle, we see, in disenfranchised grief to realise what it is we're losing. It's variable, and people may not realise what we've lost. I think those are probably concepts that most of us in the room would recognise as valid and real. And so I just want, very mindful of time and where we are in terms of our schedule this afternoon, we know that it can be helpful to identify and name our losses. That's an important part of the process of kind of figuring out how we might live alongside them in manageable ways. And I just literally, in the sort of 30 seconds to a minute that we can give to this slot, would you just shout out some of the losses that you are embracing? Just, they need to be 1 word, 2 words. We don't need a definition or an explanation with you at the time. But just what are some of the losses that are real to you and to us in the room right now? Just just one word would be great.
Anticipation.
Anticipation.
Losing our retirement together.
Thank you. It's retirement.
Peace.
Peace. Thank you. Any other losses that come to mind that you can name? Memories. Yeah.
Relationship.
Relationship.
Our happy family.
And your happy family. Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot of very significant losses in a very short space of time. If I can just ask us, and without wanting to push anybody into a place where we're not comfortable, and please take what is helpful and leave what is not in this moment. How do our losses and responding to our losses perhaps make us feel, think, behave? Again, just one word, 2 words.
Angry.
Angry.
Scared.
Scared.
Helpless.
Helpless.
Irrational.
Irrational.
Out of control. Out of
Control. Yeah. Yeah.
Sad.
Sad. That's another very difficult kind of collection of words that represent the places that we're perhaps carrying, not always recognising that we're carrying, but are on an ongoing basis. What would you say to a friend who described this as how she was feeling or he was feeling? What might you suggest? What might you want for them?
I give them a hug.
Yeah.
Hug.
Aren't the right words. I think I'm secure about it.
Yeah.
I'd want to support them, or for them to find support, get
Yeah.
support.
Yeah, yeah, to find the support that they need
Yeah.
in this moment, for sure, for sure. Sometimes it's helpful to turn our thinking around, and perhaps none of us are very good at asking for help or seeking support for ourselves, but sometimes to turn it around and thinking this is somebody else. What would I want for them? And perhaps begin to unpack where our needs might lie within that. Obviously, we don't want to leave our conversation at this point. I think it's important to identify a name for us to recognise the scale at which we live with loss in these dementia diagnoses, but also to begin to seek out strategies that help us to find balance as we continue to live with these losses month on month. Balancing self-care with self-compassion is really, really important. I've put some little handouts around the room, and if you just have a quick pick up of them now, just have a quick scan through. Obviously there's no magic fix, of course, to any of the concepts we're talking about right now. There's one underneath it, I can see you see it. Just have a quick scan through and take them away, chat about them. You will have your own to add to those strategies, I know. But these are lists. This is a list that's been kind of compiled as a result of conversations with members of RDS Dementia Support over many conversations like this, and with a lot more time to do so. And so there are a couple that stand out for me, which I'd like to just flag to you now. One is being alert to triggers and recognising how in the moment of a trigger for our grief can feel as painful and as raw as it did in the moment of its first hit. So we can kind of have our pain return for grief triggered by the most significant, but also the most insignificant of factors. So we might prepare ourselves for an anniversary or a birthday or a Christmas event, but actually it's when a car pulls up alongside us, which is the car our brother used to drive, or our mother used to, or meal that our mother used to cook. Those kind of triggers that come silent. But to recognise that in the moment, that pain button can feel as pressed and as raw, but that actually we can reassure and recognise in our minds that we have strategies that we can engage with, that allow us to process and live with the grief that we feel in that moment. That support exists on a variety of levels. So we will have some friends who we can sit and do nothing with and share a gin and talk about other stuff. We'll have some friends who we might turn to for the deep emotional kind of off-notes that we need to do. But basically to recognise that support needs are present for all of us. We all have support needs. Some of the sort of different domains of support are easier to meet than others, but it's sometimes helpful to just have a think about the kinds of support that we might require in order to function as well as possible, and to identify perhaps where our gaps might lie. We might be people who have a lot of social and emotional support, but very little practical support. Perhaps there are things we can do to build up the practical support aspects of our life, which will impact on the other areas too, just by way of an example. So kind of looking for gaps in terms of where support might lie. And obviously, as you know, rare dementia support seeks to address support across as many ranges and levels as possible, and seeking and accepting, reaching out for support, I think is one of the really important parts and components of that toolkit for managing and adapting to living with ongoing and chronic losses that are inevitable in these disease diagnoses. And I'm going to hand over to Nikki now to talk a little bit more about the support that rare dementia support can provide. Thank you.
We're a bit aware that the agenda is academic at this stage, so with that in mind, if people are, need a bathroom break or would like to go and grab a quick drink, we are going to continue on with the presentations, but please just nip out quietly if you need to.
Okay, I won't zap you off. Thank you, Jill. So I'm Nikki Zimmermann. I know some of you have lots of new faces today, which is lovely to see. I'm going to talk to you about rare dementia support. Now, I'm going to embarrass Seb now because I embarrassed him earlier, how I affectionately turned to him as the pin-up boy, but Seb is our lead for RDS, and RDS has grown immensely over the years, and it's also down to what Seb allows us to do. He's such a fantastic sort of lead that allows us to bring our ideas to him and develop more and more services for you. So we are now up to nearly 6,500 members, which is amazing, and these are people living with rare dementias, their loved ones that look after them, family members and health professionals. They also really want to get involved in their care. And with the groups, the 7 different rare dementia groups, there's 266 with our familiar Alzheimer's group and 626 from the DIAN group. So it goes across too. And these are the sorts of things we do. We do one-to-one support. We do small groups. So we've got DIAN support groups and familiar Alzheimer's disease peer support groups. And then we do some theme programs. So Jill's just spoke a little bit about her program that she does, and you go to a certain amount of sessions a couple of times a year. We do one for late stage carers about practical support that they need. We have focus groups, so we've got a group of other people that are living with, mostly the early stages. We get to listen to Phil's research projects and things and give their feedback, which is really, really important before it goes to the next step. And then we've got some post-diagnostic support information sessions we're going to be starting soon as well. And of course, we have seminars like this one, and we have a care seminar, and we have seminars for the other groups. And our recent development as well is our rare dementia support champions, which is people like you that come and spend time with us and go out into the community, sharing your lived experience, getting those health professionals, getting those community groups to understand what it's like living with or caring for somebody or having cared for somebody with rare dementia, because they just know it's dementia, don't they? And we know it's not just dementia, there's so much more. So there's lots of services that we're doing now and pushing things forward. So if we think about the seminars, but obviously I don't need to tell you what this is about because you're enjoying it all today. But we have 2 seminars a bit early and mid-stage for carers. And these are carers from all the different dementias that we support, and then we have two for the mid to late stages. And we keep it separate so the topics are much more suitable for those groups. There's lots of common themes that are involved, so we're talking about care planning, difficult situations, finding solutions. We talk about different support options that lie in people's communities, and we talk about how you make some positive changes at home. Also, sort of at early stages for people, especially when they've got genetic conditions and things are changing, it's talking about sort of when people have to leave work and they feel their days with hobbies. So we have some really positive talks about that. In all of our seminars, we always get our members involved, so they don't want to listen to me or the other team talk all day, so listening to people's experiences is really important. The peer support groups that we run 2 groups each month for Young, which also some people living with familiar Alzheimer's disease as well. And the group of people that have got the diagnosis, there's variations of topics, but it's always very uplifting and inspiring. We talk about occupation of time, we talk about travelling, lots of bucket lists that are going around, lots of people planning doing things, and we talk about keeping them safe while doing that, and what sort of technology can help for that. In the carers group, there's always lots of advice and strategies, and it's really good to see people build those peer support ties between each other, but also sharing their strategies, personal assistance, what sort of things you need to put on the need assessment, but also talk about taking some positive risks as well to really enjoy life together. And then there's the FAD online quarterly group, which Helen and Natalie run, and that's information-giving groups. But they also have their breakout rooms as well, so different groups for people to get involved in and get some peer support. During the one-to-one support, and that varies at various different levels when we do support calls and Zooms, we try and do that. And it often starts at the point before diagnosis. And we get lots and lots of questions about genetic testing. And that's when I work with Helen, like, we've got these questions, let's work together, how do we support these people? We do a lot of support about being at work still, making reasonable adjustments when things have to change, so taking early retirement, and again, sort of hobbies to sort of fill people's days with their well-being. At mid-stage, I would have thought most of our calls are about sort of introducing some support and care into the home, supporting the families. And then later stages, we're often supporting people when they're sort of transitioning into care, different care environments. So a real variety of things we cover. It just sort of gives you a sort of snapshot of the sorts of things that we do that you can contact us for. So one of the things I want to talk about is a case study that I've done recently. So I think it just brings it to life of what sort of things that we actually do. And some of you know Vanessa and John that have been part of the group for a long time. And Vanessa really wanted me to share this experience with them. And basically it started with sort of previous to what I'd done with her, because she came back to me when John was transitioning into a care home, and the care home said, "Oh, sorry mate, we don't want you. And she was very, very upset about that, and could we help? So I offered to have a call with the regional manager from the care home, and I said, well, what's the problem? I said, well, a bit scared really. He's 44 and he's an ex-policeman, and I don't know whether we're going to be able to manage here. And I said, well, you know, can we sort of have a call? Can we explain and see if we can make a difference? And one of the things that I really like when we're having these conversations with health professionals, if they don't understand, and they say, I'm really willing to learn. So I said, look, I'll have a chat with you, and then we'll have a chat with the staff and come together there. So it was really all about meeting his needs, understanding what the disease meant for John and the changes what it were, and actually if they could actually look after him well, and that's what they really wanted to do. So I went to the care home. It wasn't too far from where I lived, so I thought I'm going to go down there and see if anybody will turn up and listen to me. And quite often when I do this at care homes, they say, oh, we're really busy today, so there's only 3 staff here that can listen to you. And 22 of them came and they sat down and they were really interested. They wanted to understand what familial Alzheimer's was and why was it different. And they said, well, we've got lots of people in here that are 85 and they've got memory problems, and I don't think this is going to be the same. So we explained the difference, and actually it's especially specific to what symptoms that John had, and you know what they really needed to understand with this. So first of all, we really wanted to paint a picture of John and about his work. He was a policeman, and how proud he was of that. You know, we wanted to show his identity. He was a policeman. He was a husband. He was a dad. He was a brother, sister, cousin. He had lots of friends. You know, really sort of showing them the person, not the disease. And we know as well that he's a big family, he's got lots of friends, and they're going to be involved in his care. So we sort of, well, you know, you don't have to do this all yourself. We don't want you to occupy his time 24/7. We want his friends and family involved. This is going to be his new home. We want you to invite him in. So we said, let's get a vote going, and let's really think about his interests. And they showed me, I said, look, we'll give you lots of pictures, and I think I've got actually his whole photo album out, because Vanessa sent me everything. She sent me some fantastic videos of him dressed as a bride, and singing as well. But this was the first one I showed them, with John dressed up with a rather fetching outfit on over there. And they all laughed, and they thought, all right, we've got a bit of a character coming in here, this is a good shot. We talked about his rugby, we talked about, you know, how proud he was when he left the police. We had lots of stories. We had lots of stories about his day in the police from Vanessa, which I told them about. Apparently he's known as Johnny Fingers. Apparently, if you were naughty in Croydon when John was on beat, you might get put in the back of the car and dropped off at Mitcham Common, and then left to walk back home again afterwards. He told me about all the different things that he did, all his different roles, whether he was in the specials, and taking David Cameron around, and he put his feet on the seat, John would call him rude names, those sort of things. So it was really lovely to build up a real picture of him to show who he was. So one of the things that they were really worried about is integration with people, because a lot of people in the town were in their 80s. John loved World War II stories. You know, he'd love you. He'd be great sitting next to a Carlton or Del Boy, you know, listening to when I was in the war, those stories. He also had a great love of sport, a great love of music, a great love of so many different things which could be in common with absolutely anything. We talked about it being a neurological disorder which is going to get worse, and the importance of the clinic support, that not just I was here, the whole clinic is still involved in his care, and that they didn't have to worry about that. We talked about how we would do some advanced care planning with them, and we regularly to review this. And we talked about the later stages and palliative care, and really reassured them that they are going to manage this situation. They took me also down to John's room, and they picked a special room for it. And as he was a policeman, they've got a room which is overlooking sort of the roads and the roundabout in South Croydon, which the police helicopters go around all the time because there's so much crime in the area. So neighbourhood watch for him is going to be brilliant. And we looked at all the different activities that they could adapt to suit him. And at the end of it, the care home manager said to the staff, this is going to be a real privilege looking after John. And for me, it's been a real privilege working with John and Vanessa with this. It's been fantastic. So how's it going? So I spoke to Vanessa the other day. I said, is he settled in all right? She sent me these. I think he's having a ball. I think he's having a great one. And so lovely to see his son sort of being there as well. He loved having the kids there. And I said, well, how's it really going with the home then? She said, it's really homely. He's doing loads of activities more than he was at home. The maintenance guy bought them a rugby ball, and she just said that she thinks the intervention meant the home thought they had more support to do it, and the support from Cath's teams then is still under their care. So it is, you know, don't push that sort of on anybody at all, but when people are looking in, quite often they'll get turned away straight away. We can step in, we can reassure, and we can work really well with care homes. Thank you for listening to me, and if you've got any questions or need support, you can always email us.
Nice to see you. If I've not met you before, I'm Seb. So Crutch, one of the psychologists involved in the RDS Support. And Eva, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, I'm Eva. I'm Major Field Manager for the National Brain Field, the charity that funds RDS Support.
And the first, try and be as quick as we can, but the first thing we wanted to do is show you a brief animation. Nick, myself, Nikki, Jill and others for years have been coming to these meetings telling you about our plans to have a rare dementia support centre. I don't know who's been in the group the longest, but you've probably visited about a dozen different venues, sometimes glossy lecture theatres, sometimes quite plush community halls, now this beautiful space here at Forum. I think I've pressed something. Are you able to play Emily from that? But we have finally, thanks to Fundraising you're about to hear about, the inspirational, persuasive abilities of this man over here, and lots of other people. We have now bought 2 buildings which will become a home for this rare dementia support community. I don't think we're going to be able to fit all 6,000 members in at the same time, but here are some of the main principles. But I think Sarah, you hit on it a moment ago when you said how important space sometimes is, a space to be by yourself, a space for a critical conversation, a space where you feel safe, and a space where you can receive support, and where we can also do education and research as well. So we managed to buy 2 buildings, a short walk from Green Square, hopefully an important 6-minute walk probably for people perhaps who just received a life-changing diagnosis. And this is an artist's impression from the architects team of just some of the many activities we want to host there. We do want to offer support, but we want you to feel like it's a clinical space. We do want to offer education, but it doesn't need to feel like a lecture theatre. We do want to do research, but that doesn't mean it needs to feel like a laboratory. So we're going to have this beautiful set of spaces, and what we'd really love to talk to you, so in the basement area, this will be a great opportunity for us to educate the students and researchers and support workers of tomorrow. Up on the first floor, up the ground floor where you come in, there's going to be a beautiful kitchen at the heart of the building, which will be really the home, the kind of key place that gives you a sense of being able to just move around. There's no reception desk, you can bring yourself in with friends, with family. Up on the first floor, some beautiful meeting rooms for days like today, and also more smaller, more intimate conversations, and also hybrid meetings so we can involve people who can't get to London or who are experiencing a rare dementia like FAD in another country. Some office spaces for the team, and then on the top floor, a beautiful set of suites for therapy with people like Helen, Jill, Nikki, and Bridget and other kind of key members of the team, where you can just have that kind of critical conversation that just reassures you or informs you or enables you to think differently about the situation you're in. So that's a whirlwind tour. We're making progress. Next summer, so it's genuinely a question of whether we'll be back here for our next meeting in a year's time, or maybe we can stretch it a little bit if the buildings have done their work very rapidly, and whether we might even meet there, who knows. But it's either next time or the time after that, we promise, we actually promise. I'm going to hand over to Eva to talk about that.
Thank you, thanks. I don't think I can talk quite that fast. So National Brain Field is a charity that raises much needed funds for the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery in Queen Square and the Queen Square Institute of Neurology. And we raise around $350,000 a year to keep the services of rare dementia support going. That covers pretty much staffing and expense costs and also certain projects like the RDS Cascade scheme or some of the equality and diversity programs that have also been taking place as well. We've been working with RDS really since the 90s, but since it was formally set up in 2016, and really we're there to help develop the services into its new home, which is where I lead on to the capital campaign, where we've been raising around 7 million, it's about 7.8 at the moment, and I'm delighted to say that that's been very successful so far. We've raised around 7 million, which has allowed us to buy the buildings and move ahead with the next stage of the project. We sort of work in partnership really with RDS so that we try and kind of grow our support alongside the services as they develop. We've been lucky enough to have some incredibly special grants from major neurological funders, as well as charity partnership with Iceland last year, which you you might have heard of. Richard Walker climbed Everest for us, and all the colleagues at Iceland did fundraising in stores across the country, which is fantastic. They raised over £1 million. But really, we can't thank you enough. Anybody that's taken part in fundraising in this room, and I can see quite a few, I won't name any names to embarrass anybody, but we've been really well supported. And the Rare Dementia Support community is an incredible community when it comes to fundraising. We'd like to be able to support any future fundraisers as well, so please always feel welcome to come and discuss any ideas that you have, whatever it is, and at whatever stage as well. So whether you want to do like, a fun run, a marathon or anything along those lines, but you also want to do a community event, or even you'd like to set up an in-memory page as well, do feel free. You can come and talk to us, talk to the team at any point. We've had some amazing support recently. The London Marathon income just for RDS was over 20,000. The London Landmarks race and the Hackney Half next weekend was already raised over £8,000 as well. So, we had a very special event in Halifax last week, which Nikki came and spoke at, called the Bling Fling, which was themed around the Greatest Showman, with 300 ladies in the room from Yorkshire who raised over £32,000, and that was in among stunt walkers, fire eaters and aerialists. So it was a very special event indeed. And that was to help RDS grow its regional network as well, so across the UK, not specifically to London based. We've got lots of upcoming events. We've got a golf day in Cheshire, a big fundraising evening in Manchester, the Hackney Half next weekend, and we've got places and lots of different runs for all parks, and then of course the marathon. But don't be too put off by all the running. You don't have to run. You don't have to do anything. Just, we'd be delighted if you wanted to sign up to our fundraising newsletter and just follow us. And of course, if you do have any ideas at all, then please, do contact us so that we can help you develop it. Last year, I'm looking at this beautiful slide. Last year, we were lucky enough to have the Garden of the National Rainforest Rare Space, sponsored by Project Giga. I'll never forget to say that. At Chelsea Flower Show. So this time last year, we were lucky enough to have this garden, which was fantastic. Got a huge amount of BBC coverage, and the garden has now been relocated to Exbury Gardens in Hampshire, and you can visit it there in a slightly different form. And the idea is that hopefully you'll be able to move some sort of version of that garden to a space very near to the Rare Dementia Support Centre for 2025. The garden design is actually working with the architects at the moment on the space at the back of the centre as well, so there will definitely be learnings there. So as RDS move from these temporary spaces to their home in Woburn Square, we aim to be able to provide the funding necessary to keep developing and improving these brilliant support services, the RDS membership. And just on one final note, next week with Dementia Action Week, please do follow us, follow RDS if you're on social media, and follow the National Brain Appeal. There'll be a few announcements and messaging during that week, which you might find quite interesting. I would also recommend you follow the RHS on Tuesday on their social media as well, because there's an announcement there. So thank you very much. Do come and talk to me at the end if there's anything you'd like.
You can't go away from these meetings without being asked to help in 20,000 different ways. So my ask for your help is if you have any thoughts about activities or objects or forms of support or conversation or any other way which you could envisage us using this building to improve the services we offer, and most importantly to deliver what you guys need, whether that's you individually, you and your families, you and how you approach difficult conversations with friends. We would love to hear from you at any point. These are just a few ideas of things that we envisage happening in the centre. Bottom right is an example. We've got our wonderful artist colleagues who would love to find ways in which your own lived experience, but also perhaps potentially ways of representing very much loved and lost members of the RDS community within the space in an ongoing way. So if you can think of any activities or things that we would like to see, is it possible if, I know there's going to be a suggestion for a gym cupboard.
I was thinking that, like, in line with what Ollie said, there's been a lot of discussion about children. Is there going to be a space there for people that come with their children?
Absolutely.
And then also I'm thinking there's Bosch just nearby, so their attachment and trauma unit, and whether or not it could almost be some contemplative therapy or something like that, and you could call it the Dragonfly Room in memory of my dad. And there you go.
But it's exactly those sorts of ideas. It's a beautiful kids playground right outside the front door. Absolutely, and it's exactly those sorts of ideas. You know, don't you disclose, we want quiet, you know, all of those things. No thought is too silly. We might not be able to do it, but the